Hey there, I'm srcmake and welcome to the tutorial on SQL and MySQL. And this is going to be a cheat sheet version where we just quickly talk about what data storage is and how you would use a database. We look at installing MySQL locally on our own computer so that we can make a test database locally to test things out. And we see how those commands work, and we look at SQL and all the SQL commands briefly to see why you would use them. And this is sort of like a cheat sheet version so that you can just quickly look up the command if you need to know it in the future. So I've got all the resources that we need right here on my website, and you can go ahead and click the link below this video if you want to get to this webpage. And probably you should bookmark it because it's a really good resource. Just as I said, it's a cheat sheet. Just pull it up if you need it in the future, and you quickly do what you need to do in case someone ever asks you to use SQL or MySQL. With that said, let's talk about what databases are. So a database is just a way to persist data. So how do you store data? Like, let's say we are running a bank and we've got customer information and bank transactions, money to all keep track of. How do you do that? Well, the way we store information on our computer is by writing them all to files. We have a bunch of files with all our documents in it. But that's really not good for structured data. So if you know like the type of data that's going to happen, like a customer has a first name, a last name, a bank account number, an amount in their bank account, and you know that kind of structured data, then what you want to do is you want to be efficient by storing it online in a good way that you can have programs access it or have it accessible to anyone who needs it. And that's where databases come in. Now, SQL is one type of database, and MySQL is one type of database. And the way it works is you've got this overall database, and inside of that database are tables. And MySQL is a relational database because these tables can be connected to each other. Like, for example, let's say you have one table with each customer for the bank, and they each have a name and a banking ID, a bank account number, and they have their own specific ID for that customer. Now, each of these customers can have their own slot in a certain table, but there can also be another table for each transaction the bank goes through. And each of these transactions can be obviously for a particular customer. Maybe Bill withdraws some money today and Susie deposits some money. Examples like that. Now, this is a relational database because the items in the row in one table is affected by the customers from another table. IDs are connected, and you can see that tables are really good as a way of structured databases, as opposed to NoSQL, which we'll talk about in another video. But just know that databases, MySQL is really good because they have tables and they can be related to each other. Now, you sort of should already know what databases are, so let's just get into the details. MySQL, we want to make a local database on our computer so that we can actually test things out, because a lot of the times someone will give you something like a MySQL dump file and you need to test it, but you don't have access to an online database, or it's annoying to set that up. So it's really good to be able to set it up locally on your own machine so that you can just do the testing right there. And as usual, I've got my Ubuntu 16 virtual machine running, and Ubuntu 16.04. We're going to install MySQL, and we're going to see the commands to actually use it. So I've got the page open right here on my website, and I'm going to open a terminal inside this folder called MySQL, and the first thing that we're going to do is install it. Now, this is actually one easy command. Sudo apt-get install MySQL server. And enter the password, and yes, there's a Y that you didn't get to see. Let me just bring this up a little bit. And okay, so it's asking for a password for the root user. Now, if you're familiar with Linux, then you know that there's a root user, which is why you use sudo all the time, because that logs us into root. And root is basically the main user that's going to be in charge of this SQL. So I'm just going to put password for now, but we're not going to be using the root user account to do our testing. We are just making the root user be the manager for everything. So enter the root password. It doesn't really matter because it's local, but just make sure you remember it. And again, we're installing this. Just this one command is going to install MySQL locally on our Linux computer so that we can do our testing. Now let me close this. I don't mean close it, I mean shorten it, but I guess you can't. Oh, you can? No. Oh, here it is. Okay, so it's going to install. And it installed pretty quickly, right? That's good. So now we're going to log in as the root to MySQL. It's installed right now. So MySQL, which is the command to run databases, is on our local computer. So we're going to log in right now as the root user by saying MySQL u root and /p for the password. We're going to enter the password, which is password for me. And you can see that our command window changed. It's not inside the Linux command anymore. It's in the MySQL command prompt. So just notice that this is a change. Now you can see the next line that we're going to do is we're going to create a database named srcmake. And make sure you end all of the statements with the semicolon inside the MySQL command prompt. Now, again, we've got this overall database that is going to be holding all our tables. And so remember, we've got a table with columns and rows. This is a standard table like a spreadsheet. You can imagine what a table is. And we've got a bunch of these tables inside the database. So we're making a database to hold this. Now, if you've got different projects, you make different databases for different projects. That's how it works. If you got a banking app, then do a database for the banking app. If you've got, I don't know, a fruit stand that you've got fruits tables for, then make a fruit database. But for now, for this test, we're going to make it called srcmake. So you press enter and query OK. One row affected. Yes, we created a database. Now what we want to do is we want to create a user account to access this database. So again, with databases, especially MySQL, when you create the database, like it's supposed to be for a cloud service so that you have a bunch of developers who can access that. But you want different people to maybe have different access privileges, or you want to give them different account names. You don't necessarily want everyone to have the same account name. So as the root user that owns MySQL, we are going to create a user that has access to this particular database. Because remember, different developers might have different access to different databases. So we're going to say grant all on srcmake dot period. So grant all for the srcmake database that we just made, period star asterisk, which is going to mean all tables. And we're going to make the username source user and identified by, and the password is going to be password. So this is the syntax to create a new user for a certain database. So we're saying, okay, we're going to create a user named source user. His password is going to be password, and he has access to srcmake.srcmake all the tables on srcmake. And that's great. Now the user's created. Now we're going to exit MySQL because remember, we logged in as the root user. Now we want to log in as the source user that we just made. Because it's not good to do everything as root. You might delete things, or you have too much power. No one needs all that power. So we're going to log in as source user this time, exact same way as we did with root, except we're changing the name, and the password is password. And now we're back from the Linux command line back into the MySQL command prompt. So we are going to say use srcmake. Now, again, we logged in, but we didn't log into a particular database. There are different databases for different purposes. So we're going to start using the srcmake database right here with this command. And database changed. You can see that. So the next thing we're going to do is create some tables. So again, a database holds some tables, and we're going to create a table named customers. And I'm just going to copy and paste this and show you the syntax because it's a little bit long. So copy and paste. Now, we're creating a table because the database is empty right now. And per our example, we are going to make a customer database. So create table, and honestly, this should be capitalized. All SQL commands should be capitalized, but we'll get into that in the next section. So create a table named customers, and each of the columns are going to be specified inside these parentheses. Now, the first column name is going to be customer ID. So you've got customer ID right here, and you're going to say that it's type integer. It's not null. You cannot make this null. You're saying auto increment, which means that it's going to be the first customer is 1, the second customer is going to be 2, the third customer is going to be 3. This is automatically going to be set every time you add a customer. And this is the primary key for the table. So again, I said that relational databases are special because each row can be unique and each customer can be given an ID which will match them to another table with all the like banking transactions or anything else. So primary key basically means that for this database, this is the primary key, this table. And we're going to say the customer has a first name and a last name, and that's the table. So we've got 3 columns: ID, first name, last name. And the last 2 columns are text because obviously it's not a number, it's text. So we press enter and that's good. So let's insert some customers into the table. Now this is another SQL command which we'll go into. But we're inserting into customers and we're going to insert a customer, their first name and last name because the ID is going to be auto incremented. And this is the syntax. So in the customers table, for the first column, for the first name column and the last name column, I want you to put in the values Bill and Johnson. And this is the syntax for it. So insert into customers, first name, last name, values, Bill Johnson. Obviously, you can sort of see what it is. This is SQL, which we're going to talk about in the second half of this video, coming up really soon. But yeah, you just insert the customer into the table. And did that work? I think that worked. Did I mess that up somehow? I don't think I did. So let's do another SQL command, even though this looks a little weird. Did I mess this up? I feel like I messed it up, but I don't see what would be the issue. Okay, whatever. Let's just do select from customers. Okay, so this is what this command does. This is another SQL command. We did 3 SQL commands in the past 3 prompts. So anytime you're inside MySQL, what you're using is SQL to talk to the database, which is structured query language. We'll talk about that in a second. And this isn't really working, which is weird. Okay, let's try it one more time. I forgot the semicolon. Okay, it's an empty set, so this didn't work. Let's try it one more time. What did I mess up? Let me copy and paste it this time. Unless I messed up the tables last time. I don't think I did. Okay, so this evidently worked. I don't know what I did incorrectly here. Oh, I forgot the semicolon on Johnson. That might have been really dumb. Okay, so don't forget, since this is text, you need this little parenthesis. So we inserted Bill Johnson into the table. Now we want to look at the table really quickly. And by all means, go ahead and add as many people as you want into the database. So Susie, I don't know, Smith. Add as many people as you need. That's the syntax for it. And the way you look at the table is, you already saw, select every row from customers. So select all rows from customers table. And I keep forgetting the semicolon. Don't forget the semicolon. And MySQL will print out the table for you. So you can see the table, how it looks like. You got the customer ID, the first name, and the last name. Okay. So that's basically it for MySQL, but I'm going to show you a trick. Now, remember, you have this database, but right now it exists only locally on your computer. What happens if you want to give this data to someone else so they can look at the project, or if you want to actually upload this to a cloud MySQL server so that it can exist as an actual database on the internet for your programs? Then you make what's called an SQL dump. Now, an SQL dump is a file that holds the database syntax. And there's a command to do this, and this is the command. MySQL dump, I'm just going to copy it. So first thing you have to do is you have to exit the SQL command prompt. So now we're back in Linux. And what you say is MySQL dump is the command that we're using as part of a Linux command. You know, like ls and cd, make directory, all those commands. This is just another command that's part of SQL. So MySQL dump for source user and his password, you're going to create a srcmake db.sql file using the srcmake db database. So we're turning this database into a file. And I'm going to enter the password, and I'm just going to press enter. And when you look inside, you see a bunch of commands, and this is basically going to recreate the database. So if you want to, so again, we're making these local MySQL databases and tables so that we can test our code locally. But if you want to actually give this database to someone else, you can dump it into this file, and then when they want to use it, you just give them this file too. And the syntax is exactly the same, but oh, I messed this up. You're supposed to change this to a inward arrow. So now you're saying that this file, make it into this database on my local machine. And that is the syntax. So I need to change this command. I'm sorry about this. And you can see that basically what MySQL does is it runs every single one of those commands that was inside the MySQL dump file. So that's MySQL dump. That's MySQL. If you want to do local SQL databases, then that's how you do it. Really simple. Again, this is a cheat sheet. I spent a lot of time talking about it to a new user, but when you're ready to do it yourself, just come to this page if you bookmarked it and you can do it yourself. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about really quickly in this video is SQL. So we're back on Windows, and we're just going to read on our website. So SQL. Now, how you notice that we were doing two things. We had the Linux command prompt, and we had inside of that MySQL command prompt. And inside of MySQL and inside your programs, the way you speak to the database is through structured query language, which is called SQL. Now, to put it really simply, SQL is a language that you use to query the database. You use all of these types of commands to formulate what you want from the tables of the database. And the reason you would do that, and the reason it's really important to do that, is because when you're looking for certain information, instead of getting like the entire database into your app or into your website or into your program, whatever is going to be like facilitating talking to the database, you should use SQL, and if you make a good query, then you can get exactly what you need, and that's really important. So learning SQL is a really important skill, and there are a bunch of commands in SQL. Now, I'll be really honest with you. This website is amazing for just quickly learning what an SQL command does and examples of how to use it. I personally like this website, which is why I'm recommending it. But on my website, I've got just what the commands do. So the select command can get the entire table of specific columns. The where command is command and where. So this would be like select column name from the table where there's a certain condition, and an example of the condition would be where country equals Sweden if you had like a column with country names. And there are just a bunch of commands here. I don't want to spend time going over them because honestly this is something you need to read. There's no point in listening to someone talk about it. What you need to do is practice with your own database, and I think this website's a good resource. So that is SQL. You use it to query MySQL databases. And MySQL is really just one type of database. There might be other names, and they might have their own little quirks in their own SQL queries depending on the actual database. So you'll have to look out for that because there's actually different types of MySQL types. But that's MySQL. So now you can locally test databases on your own computer, and that's really important. So I'm srcmake, and that was MySQL. Go ahead and subscribe if you like this content, especially because I'm going to be doing a video on NoSQL. So there's this thing called Mongo, and it's really popular. And instead of having your data in specific structured tables where you have to know the columns, you have to have a first name and a last name, you have to set all that. Basically, you put everything in JSON format, and that's like a different type of database. So that's MySQL. We're going to look at other types of databases in other videos. Go ahead and subscribe. I'm srcmake. Thanks for watching.